Hi, I'm Erin Power.
And I'm Laura Rupsis.
We're certified health coaches, and this is Health Coach Radio.
This podcast is about the art, science, and business of health coaching.
We share our insider tips to help you become a better coach and entrepreneur.
And we interview expert guests to discover how they've made it in this growing field.
It's time for health coaches to make an impact.
It's time for Health Coach Radio.
Dr. Gabrielle Lyon is our guest today, and we honestly could have talked for hours. Dr. Lyon practices Muscle-Centric Medicine, a branch of preventative medicine of her own creation that puts muscle quantity and quality on the front burner. Here's a powerful excerpt from her website. Want to burn fat? Improve your body composition? Decrease your risk of heart disease and diabetes? What about increasing your mobility and energy levels? If that's your goal, then it's time to prioritize your largest organ and address all your vital needs. Muscle is a vastly underestimated resource, one that burns fat, influences metabolism, protects against disease, and so much more. Treat your muscles right, and the results will astound you. Don't you just feel that? Doesn't it feel like lean body mass has been a tragically ignored element to health and longevity? And why aren't more doctors encouraging us to gain lean body mass instead of just reducing fat? As a couple of protein-loving, strength-training meatheads, Laura and I pick Dr. Lyon's brain a lot. Encouraging clients to embrace the sturdiness, the power of muscle and lean body mass is a hard sell in a world that's been buried in diet culture for what's looking like 4 generations and counting. But I think we're up to the task. What do you think, coaches? A quick promotional message, and then we'll be on our way with this episode. We've been working on something pretty cool behind the scenes that I'm excited to tell you about. My Primal Coach is a convenient app-based health coaching program that delivers daily lessons with actionable tips for losing weight, gaining strength and energy, sleeping better, managing stress, and more. It provides personal one-on-one coaching to help you stay on track and reach your wellness goals in just 12 weeks. My Primal Coach is developed and delivered by the team behind Primal Health Coach Institute, the first and preeminent ancestral health coaching school in existence. Primal Health Coach Institute has trained and certified thousands of successful health coaches across 75 countries around the world. We're experts in behavior change, and we understand how to get clients the results they desire. Our mission at My Primal Coach is the same as our mission with Primal Health Coach Institute: to help 100 million people reclaim health and wellness through education and coaching. It's pretty exciting, very cool. Check it out for yourself at myprimalcoach.com. We love to see who's listening out there, so take a screen grab of your podcast player and tag us on Instagram at Health Coach Radio. And don't forget, the show notes can be found at primalhealthcoach.com/radio. Please indulge us now as we totally fangirl all the way through this episode. We do hope you'll enjoy this incredible conversation with Dr. Gabrielle Lyon.
Okay, I can't even tell you guys how excited I am for this interview. We've got Dr. Gabrielle Lyon in the house. Dr. Lyon, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you guys so much for having me. Really.
Oh my gosh. I feel so. First of all, it took us like a month or so to even get you in here. You're a very busy woman, a couple of months, I think, actually. So do you mind telling, Erin and I know who you are, and I got to imagine many of the people listening already do as well. But for those that don't, can you give us a little bit of your background story?
I would love to. I practice a concept of medicine called Muscle-Centric Medicine. Nice. And this concept of medicine actually came through 20 years of experience. And there was a moment in my fellowship, and I'll share a little bit about my background story. There was a moment in my fellowship where I realized that we've actually been doing medicine wrong, especially as it relates to metabolic health. It was one of those aha moments that I would say all coaches, all physicians have. If you're really there and in it with the patient, you will have an aha moment. So in my fellowship, it dawned on me that we keep talking about obesity and this concept of being obese, but really we're not over fat, we're under muscled.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons why obesity, weight management, the diseases that ride along with obesity are so hard to treat, because we're looking at it from the wrong paradigm. And you and I all know that you can't really correct a problem if your foundation of thinking and framing the problem is incorrect. you will continue to relapse. So that's a long way of saying I practice and founded the Institute for Muscle-Centric Medicine. My background is a bit unique, and I am just very fortunate that I've had the experiences that I've had. I did my undergraduate at the University of Illinois in human nutrition, vitamin, mineral metabolism under Dr. Donald Layman. And Donald Layman is a world-class researcher. He is one of the innovators of protein metabolism research. And that is, unheard of. There's only a few of the guys. He's 70. He's going to kill me for saying his age, but he's 70 and there's only really a few of those guys. And I trained underneath him for the last 20 years. He's mentored me.
Wow.
So I was really lucky to do that. Did my undergraduate in human nutrition, vitamin, mineral metabolism, went to medical school, did 2 years in psychiatry, which I think is very applicable to health coaching and truly leveraging human behavior. Then I did 3 years of family medicine. And then I went back and I did a 2-year postdoc at WashU in St. Louis in obesity medicine, human nutrition, and geriatrics. And what that was a combined fellowship in clinical research, researching with humans and as well as clinical practice.
Wow, that is a robust background.
I don't recommend anyone doing that, really. Just assume that your knowledge base is good enough, Yeah, 17 some years later, yes.
It's incredible that you've managed to achieve so much and spent so much time in academia. Like it's remarkable. Definitely a productive human. Okay, there's just so much. I was going to say meat on the bone, but that was such a protein pun, pun. We have to go with it.
Love it. I actually haven't heard that one before, so I'm good with that.
There you go. Well, yeah, I mean, the way you've articulated obesity is not just an overfat problem, it's an under muscle problem. And I had this thought too, and I don't know if I picked it up from you or where I got it, but it's like when you go to the doctor and the doctor says, okay, get on the scale, which I don't even half the time know why we have to get on that tool of ignorance. But anyway, we get on it and it tells us what our gravitational force is. And then the medical decisions are made from that. And it's like, well, that tool didn't tell you anything about what's actually happening in my body, first of all. Yeah. Secondly, why aren't we all getting into like the DEXA machine and actually getting a real picture? So is that kind of where you would start with a patient?
So it's really interesting. I do think any baseline body fat measurements are good, right? We can't change any data that we don't know. And I really do believe having a good foundation of understanding of where you're at, certainly not imparting judgment on that, but what is your weight? What is your body fat? What is your skeletal muscle? It's interesting. So you mentioned DEXA, and what is so fascinating about skeletal muscle is while typically DEXA is what's used, it doesn't give us a great picture of skeletal muscle. So this is some of the stuff that I want to leave as part of a legacy, is to be able to actually change this. Being able to measure skeletal muscle appropriately doesn't really exist. The way in which individuals would do that would be a CT or MRI. Wow. And that doesn't even give us the quality of the tissue. This is a biopsy situation. Oh, yes. Wow. And this is what's so interesting. So DEXA is actually the best that we really have, and the best that is what is available to clinicians, to coaches, and it's valuable because we can track information. But the DEXA doesn't actually show skeletal muscle; it just shows lean mass. And it may give you a general idea of skeletal muscle, but there are challenges with it, which is so fascinating. This brings me to the next point. Do we have a more efficient tool that would give us a great correlation of what not only the amount of skeletal muscle mass is, not lean mass, but also the quality of the tissue? We don't.
Okay.
It doesn't exist in practice.
For people listening, could you explain what DEXA is and how it works relative to maybe some other options?
Well, I probably am not the best person to explain the mechanism of DEXA for you, but I will tell you it is, DEXA is considered this dual X-ray machine, and it's can tell you bone density. Typically we utilize a DEXA for bone density. It will give you body fat percentage, which it is pretty accurate. And depending on the machine quality, it will break down lean mass, which includes everything other than fat.
Got it.
So it's everything. And then of course, bone. So that is one way in which you would measure body fat. That is typically how we look at skeletal muscle and lean tissue, which again is everything else. What is great about a DEXA is it's trackable and it's validated, especially as it relates to body fat and bone density. As it relates to skeletal muscle, I think that that is a challenging part of the conversation. And I'm going to tell you why. When we look at body fat percentages, we know where there is impact metabolically. For example, if an individual has a body fat percentage of over 30, it is perhaps plausible that we will see increased inflammatory markers and all kinds of things. For Erin and for Laura, I can't tell you what your percent skeletal muscle mass should be.
Right.
I have no idea, and nobody does.
Huh.
These are really important points to understand, that we have focused so much on adiposity that we have a general understanding of that percentage. There is no concept of how much skeletal muscle mass is required for optimal health. Not only optimal health, but what it looks like for maintaining longevity.
Yeah.
And aging, 65 and beyond, 40 and beyond. We have no idea.
Wow, that's what a gap. What an enormous gap. I know this is your entire body of work. You're like, hello, I know this is a huge gap.
No. So this is actually where it came from.
Yeah.
My body of work was born from seeing these major holes in the way in which we're treating individuals. Again, we are constantly focusing on adiposity, which I understand why. Okay. Because obviously it makes things, it's hard to move. You'd feel like you don't look good. It does drive inflammatory markers that has a whole host of other problems. And this really came down to, I saw a patient, and this patient was part of our clinical study, and we were looking at interventions and body fat. And part of what I was doing is I was looking at the interface between obesity, body weight, fat mass, and brain function. Mm-hmm. And I did neurocognitive testing, and I became very attached to this woman. And she was a woman of 3 children, and she was in her late 50s. And I imaged her brain, and her brain looked like an Alzheimer's patient.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, oh my God, we are failing. The system is failing.
Yeah.
And I knew, just from seeing these scans that, 10 years, she's going to really struggle to remember where her keys are and begin to struggle with her kids' names. And it was that she had tried to lose weight over 3 decades of yo-yo dieting. And it was at that moment that really muscle-centric medicine was born, because if fixing obesity was the problem, we wouldn't be in this situation.
Right.
It's not the right tissue. We have to change the way in which we're thinking about it. And really, it truly is about being under-muscled. And the holes in the literature and the holes in the medical community are clear. We don't even know, where your blood pressure should be. We know all these other things. We have no idea what your skeletal muscle mass would be. And it's the largest organ in the body. It's not skin. It is the largest, heaviest weight. It makes up above 40% of the weight. And it's an endocrine organ. It's above and beyond all of these things. And we are largely domesticated as a society. And if we can shift the understanding through not only resistance training, but also really understanding that muscle is this organ. The organ changes as you age. It is not as robust at sensing nutrients as it used to be. And we must account for that. And we must change the way that we do things. It is not just simply about a paleo lifestyle or no gluten or no dairy. When it comes to skeletal muscle, it's much more directed than that.
Wow.
So I wonder, gosh, so many things are like swimming around in my head right now. Right. So we have this, what appears to be a singular focus on adiposity and fat tissue. Is it because Absolutely. So I'm wondering if this is a little bit of a chicken and the egg scenario. Do we focus on that because it's the easiest to track, or is it the easiest to track because we focused on it and we know how to measure it, and nobody's just taken the time to figure out? Because you're right. I owned a gym in Illinois. I actually just moved
that
to
is
Florida.
So cool. I had no idea. Amazing.
Yeah. I just moved to Florida from Illinois.
Okay.
And I left my gym behind. Anyway, long story.
Thank God.
But we had no kidding. We had a, what was it called? A in-body machine there.
Yep.
And again, knowing that this isn't 100% accurate by any means. It at least gave us a starting point.
Absolutely.
It gave us something to track.
I love the InBody. We have one. Yes,
awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, we could tell lean mass from fat mass, all this other stuff. But most importantly, it helped change the conversation.
Yep.
Okay. But there is a function in there that says muscle mass. So you're telling me that
it's the best that that is absolutely, there's a margin of error there, but yes, that is absolutely usable. It's what I use in clinic all the time.
Okay. Awesome. So let's talk a little bit, because here, this is right in the wheelhouse of health coaches, is being able to have a conversation with our clients on, hey, it's what you focus on that's going to either grow or not grow and make changes. And so from the standpoint, from a clinic, so you're looking at this from a clinical point of view, but also for coaches looking at this, working with clients, how do you change the conversation? Let's say, health coaches don't have an InBody machine, but they know they've got clients that clearly need to lose some weight. What's a good starting place? If we know, is it finding a baseline, finding a place for somebody to get measured? Can they start from a different point of view?
So this is interesting. So you're asking me, I want to understand what you're asking me. You're asking me, how do we change the conversation from being fat focused to muscle centric from a patient who is not coming to you saying, I want to improve my body composition. Right. Is that right? Or are they saying, I am, over fat, or I have too much fat, I want to lose fat?
Right. So yes, that's what I'm asking. And it no doubt came out jumbled, because I have 5 or 6 questions.
I want to make sure that I get the question right, because, for example, my patients, by the time they get to me, they already know, for the most part. They kind of have a little bit of background. So that's interesting. How would you then change the conversation? The first thing that I would ask is, how long have you been struggling? The reality is, the treatment must match the severity of the illness, or the treatment must match the severity of the suffering, or the severity of whatever the clinical situation is. For example, and by the way, I will tell you that obesity starts in skeletal muscle first. Right. It's a muscle issue first, but that's a conversation for another day, I suppose. The question becomes asking an individual, really, how long has this struggle been going on? And if the struggle has been going on for a few months, then it can be a softer conversation. But typically, by the time someone is getting to a health coach, they're like, man, I cannot regulate my weight. My husband can eat Doritos and whatever, and I look at something and I'm gaining weight, or I just can't lose these extra 10 pounds. And, at that point, I would immediately say, well, why don't we optimize for skeletal muscle first? Why don't we focus on your tissue? I mean, you wouldn't say tissue, but why don't we focus on the flip side of this conversation? So you have adiposity, and then you have muscle. When you correct for muscle mass, and then you correct nutritionally for optimizing for muscle mass, you then lose body fat. You correct the metabolic markers. It's much more positive. It's not fat phobic. It's muscle centric. Right. It takes away, when people lose fat or body fat, they're, it's kind of this nebulous, well, how many pounds am I going to lose? It really takes away control from the individual, from the coach, and from the patient. But if you then switch it to, what are we going to gain? How are we going to move this conversation in a positive way? You create empowerment, and humans are totally predictable. You give them a win and they are hungry for the next. Especially the patients that are coming to you guys. They don't want to be mediocre. They don't want to have a mediocre experience. They are in it to win it, So that's what I would do.
I just love that so much. And that was exactly what I was looking for. The concept of focusing on exactly what it is you want to see grow, rather than constantly focusing on what you're trying to get rid of. This is something we talk about in coaching, right? Erin is talking about, like, bringing something to you rather than trying to go ahead.
Approach versus avoidance goals. The only thing is that in my brain that I'm struggling to get over is that, unfortunately, diet culture, who I love to throw under the bus. I love throwing diet culture under the bus. Has trained these folks that I need to be lighter. We're talking about women. So let's just focus on women for a second, because I think that's probably who most of our clients are anyway. But men have a horse in this race too. But for women, culturally we're told, get lighter, 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 lighter is what you want to be, frail, tiny, light little thing. So to try to encourage a client, instead of the fat phobic approach of losing fat, let's work on gaining muscle. That's going to be a major hill for them to traverse, because now I'm getting heavier on the scale, or I'm not getting lighter, which is all I ever wanted. Right. This is generations of cultural conditioning.
Right.
I know you had so you did some psychology in your education. So
I trained 2 years as a psychiatrist.
Yeah.
Crazy. And I ran a weight management clinic, but
good.
Yep. I think what you're saying is true. And we have to understand that when we don't question beliefs, then they become truths, right? Mm-hmm. And part of this being lighter, it is really driven by industry. The same companies that pay to make you fat are the same companies that pay to make you skinny, like whether it's Jenny Craig or Weight Watchers, they're all in bed together. And that is really fascinating, or at least they were in the past. The idea in terms of weight, it's by managing expectation. If you can take an individual and you can give them foresight, we know that the smaller an individual is, the lower their bone density is, the less likely they are going to have a quality of life as they age.
Yes.
The more metabolic challenges they're going to have. Yep. It's great if you want to be thin and lean, and then if you break a hip at 60, you're in big trouble.
Okay.
And this happens. Yes. So it's projecting into the future, the behavior that you're doing now. What are those unintended consequences? And then, what I would do is I would say, man, have you ever been to a nursing home? I mean, really, if you're really concerned about someone, you just lay it on thick.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm telling you, because I've worked in nursing homes. That is brutal. Mm-hmm. Nobody wants that experience ever.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been trying to share this kind of language in my social feeds, for example. So this is where coaches would get their prospective clients, kind of our funnel of prospective clients is in our social feeds or wherever. And it was like this aha moment I had one day where it's like, man, I spent my teens, 20s, and 30s trying to be as light as possible. Now I'm in my 40s, and it's like, I want to be really robust.
Right.
Like the robust, strong, heavy animals are the ones that survive and thrive. Totally. And trying to socialize this idea, though, like all those years I spent trying to get lighter, 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 lighter. And then you jump ahead and look at, say, my dad, who's frail.
Yes, exactly.
But it's almost like, again, a diet culture. It is hard. I just want to put it out there that it's extremely hard to get folks to make that connection between, when I'm young, I want to be light. When I'm old, I don't want to be light. And the solution in the middle here is to build myself up and be super strong.
Erin, that's who we fight for. Yeah. That's why I take all the time to do this. That's who actually we're fighting for. We're fighting for the people in the middle.
Yeah.
The young people, they think they know everything. No offense. They, are going to, whatever. They're, they don't have enough life experience. They don't have enough time in the arena seeing patients, seeing people purely based on age.
Right.
And then, we have the people in the middle, and that's who we have to fight for, because there's such a narrative. And I believe that if we can really shift this conversation, then we can actually save the trajectory of your father. That didn't have to be that way. Right. You are right on the money. You are exactly the kind of person that needs to be talking about it, because you've had the experience, you have the insight, and now the foresight. And that's really, if we can change that, then we're on it. And then it's going to change the world, truly.
Yeah, Erin, and you're so right as far as being able to change how much more difficult it is to have this conversation for women. Because, you take a look at the two different paradigms. The idea of men and strength training and adding mass is right in their wheelhouse. Yeah, they want to lose the gut, but getting them on board to build muscle, they're all in. Whereas, although I do see lots of men out there running and cardio.
You know what my husband would say? You know what my husband say? Like, why are you, here's my husband's a SEAL. He goes, how would you train to retreat?
Oh,
I love that. Great.
When someone's like, do you run? You're like, he looks at me, he's like, well, why would I train to retreat?
Nice.
Anyway, that just goes to the whole framework of what you're saying. Yeah. It's interesting. It's very difficult to put on muscle. especially for women. They think that if they go lift weights and they eat a steak at dinner, they're going to put on muscle.
Right.
The newer you are in training, of course, you'll have a more robust change in body composition. Then the more advanced you become, the harder it becomes. I mean, yeah, it becomes very challenging.
Yeah. So, but I do think, for all anyone listening who really kind of doesn't necessarily have a particular gender they work with, or if you focus on males, I think having this conversation is going to be, there's going to be fewer obstacles as far as, right, versus those of us with women. Again, coming from, we owned a CrossFit gym where we did a lot of strength training, and I had to focus on these women of just being more capable. This is the reason you want to get stronger. And I promise you, you're not going to get bulky unless you're trying to get bulky or doing something over and above what you're going to be doing here at the gym or sort of nutritionally. But at the same time, once I started strength training, my idea and mental picture of a beautiful female form changed dramatically.
Right.
I was no longer interested in this skinny, kind of frail, wafy. I really admired the women that had a bicep, that had deltoids, that had a butt, and hamstrings,
Right.
And so I think a lot of this too is if we can change the conversation from a health perspective about what muscle does,
right,
we can, to a certain degree over time, I hope, help women sort of reframe what a beautiful sort of female form looks like.
Before it's too late. I think that they would all agree. It's interesting. Later on in life, they come to this moment where they think, man,
if only. Yeah.
If only. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So building muscle, adding muscle is difficult. Would you mind explaining? And I think this is true for men too. We have some hard gainers, or we have some people that are, anyway.
Yeah.
Long story short,
I would agree with that. I would agree with that.
It's certainly harder than putting on fat mass.
I know.
I think we can all agree.
So terrible.
Yeah.
It's interesting. There certainly is different, like you said, there are hard gainers. Some individuals, just based on their phenotype, will be more likely to put on muscle mass. For example, my husband, or, some of my friends, they definitely can put on muscle mass. There is, and then you see the tall, slender people where really it's impossible. It's not impossible, but the rate in which an individual, if someone is very new and has never trained, they could, who knows, put on 24 pounds of muscle in a year. I mean, that would be who knows if anyone could do that, but at the extreme, whether that's anyway. So what's interesting is that being consistent, obviously. So in terms of training, we know that you must go to a fatigability, and really it is about volume. And that, some of that data is out of Stu Phillips labs. So it's, I think the biggest mistake I think people, make, and where health coaches can really come in, is that people will say, yes, I went to go lift weights, and the intensity and the effort and the focus is it's all going through the motions. I did 12 sets. I did 4 sets of 12 reps. Mm-hmm. And you're like, well, did you want to quit? Did you want to, and they're like, no, I wasn't even sore. I went, that's not training. That's doing activity. So by connecting with a really good trainer and really getting a well-designed program, and then also having in the mindset that it really is about that fatigability and actually putting in the effort. You don't just lose weight when you get better, you become mentally stronger, right? It's, you lose weight, whatever that is, but you gain resiliency, and you actually have to put yourself through that hard, challenging training to get that. I have found in my practice that individuals, and this makes perfect sense, is the individuals that trained hard when they were younger have a completely different body composition and have much more flexibility as they age. Mm-hmm. And you've seen it. You've seen young gymnasts, and then you see them in their 40s, and you're like, oh my God. Yeah. Right. And you're like, what do you do? They're like, oh, I walk. And you're like, go jump in front of a bus. But, we've all seen people like that. And what becomes so interesting is that skeletal muscle is this organ of locomotion, but it is also a nutrient sensing organ. And I'm going to explain what that means and why that becomes so important to understand. We all can agree that skeletal muscle is great for locomotion, running, lifting, whatever. Skeletal muscle as a nutrient organ, meaning it senses nutrients. In particular, it senses protein. And it requires the sensing of protein through this complex called mTOR to actually turn on and stimulate muscle protein synthesis. This sensing mechanism becomes less effective as we age.
Okay.
Which means it becomes, and there's multiple reasons why, but this in particular, this one complex called mTOR is responsible for muscle protein synthesis. As we age, this complex desensitizes, decreases its efficiency use of protein. What that means that in order to stimulate tissue, like you did when you were younger, you need a single robust amount of protein to actually turn on the tissue. If you eat the way that you did in your 20s and 30s, maybe 20 grams, maybe 2 eggs, you will not stimulate that tissue. That tissue requires a threshold amount of protein to actually maintain its health.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Okay. So are we talking, I'm getting into like granular details.
I'm trying really, it doesn't have to be, I don't want to ever lose anyone in these, because then it's not fun to listen to and you're like, oh my God.
Yes.
Right. That's not my goal.
This is exciting though. This is exciting because, so what I'm hearing you say is as we get older, the function of mTOR generally diminishes. So now we have to kind of micromanage it by bringing in more protein just to kind of shore up sort of. So are we talking like per meal? Are we talking throughout the day? Like, how do you break this down for people in terms of brass tacks, like putting it in practice?
Yeah. First thing that one has to understand is the per meal day, how much you're getting. What does that look like? And that largely depends on age and metabolic health, where you are in terms of body weight. My recommendation is 1 gram per pound ideal body weight.
Nice.
And that's a high amount. The reason I chose that is because it's defendable. It's not the recommended amount. It's higher, but as a nutritionist by training and as a physician in terms of what I've done in my fellowship, there's no downside by increasing for protein, and it's higher. So the recommendations in the literature will say 1.2 to 1.6, maybe they'll push at 1.8 grams per kilogram. Okay. Yeah. My recommendation, 1 gram per pound ideal body weight, is on the higher end. And here's why. When you protect and you prioritize protein first as the macronutrient, everything else falls into place. Once you understand your 24-hour need, the next step is understanding how much per meal and why. Okay. I will tell you your first meal of the day after you've been in an overnight fast. I don't care what time that is. It could be 3:00. That meal is critical. Right now, that meal is critical to stimulate muscle protein synthesis, to get your metabolic parameters correct, meaning you don't want to overshoot carbohydrates. You really want to stimulate tissue because you're now in a more catabolic state. By giving a robust and a practical robust amount would be anywhere from 30 grams at a minimum of protein to 55. The data doesn't suggest that there's any reason to go above 55 from a muscle perspective. That's not saying that you wouldn't utilize all the protein. And would you use it for neurotransmitters? Could you use it for gut health? Could you use it for a million other things? Yes. So the first meal is most important. Arguably, the data doesn't necessarily support lunch, that you need another robust meal, which is interesting.
Yeah.
But, just simply thinking about, you could go lower for that second meal. But the question then becomes compliance and also satiation. And what else are you going to do? And then that last meal should be another robust amount. You really do want to stimulate muscle protein synthesis twice a day. And we could argue that.
Oh my God. Can I just tell you why I'm so excited about this? I'm just going to give you up for 1 second.
Yeah.
So 8 years ago, when I started my health coaching business, my company's called Eat Simple because I always want to make eating very simple. I got tired of, decades of dieting, and I was like, forget it. We're going to go super simple here. So anybody who wants to track macros or anything, do not work with me because I don't care. I honestly, apart from protein. So I have the Eat Simple rules, and Eat Simple rule number 1 is always answer hunger with a meal. That's just whatever, one of my things. Eat simple. Rule number 2 is prioritize protein, and eat simple. Rule number 3 is. And the reason why I teach it to my clients is like, it's the circadian rhythm thing. It's like when you wake up in the morning and all these hormonal processes are online, that's a really great time to deliver nutrition.
Right.
And I really like the way you described it, which is like, you've just come out of so the way you described it was like, you've come out of a period of catabolism and now your body's ready to rebuild after the night, or how?
Yeah, you're more in a catabolic state. So your body is primed. Your body is primed to utilize those nutrients. That body is primed to be stimulated. It's the time, you know?
And you know what I think? So when I tell my clients, it's just to close the loop on this.
Yeah.
When I explain it to them, for them, even lay people, it's like, that actually makes a lot of sense.
Right.
Like, like it makes sense that in the early part of the day, whenever it is, that's to your point. Right. I don't care when it is. First meal of the day, it's important. It's very important, which sounds like we're saying breakfast is the most important meal of the day, but whatever, we kind of are.
No, it's the first meal, but not necessarily breakfast, right? It depends on how you define. Is it literally breaking your fast? Doesn't matter what time of day, or is it breakfast time?
Right.
Doesn't matter.
And I would say for health coaches, the initial phase, and this is actually what my book is on. So all this stuff is going to be probably coming out in a year, but all this stuff is in the book as it relates to protocols, which would be really applicable. When you think about someone who is maybe coming from more of a low protein diet, switching over, a very simple way to teach them is an even distribution of protein. So 30 grams of protein 3 times a day. There's a lot of data in the literature about that. It does help with compliance, and it does help with metabolic correction. It doesn't have to be 30 grams. Again, determining how much protein you are going to intake. Again, 1 gram per pound ideal body weight is high, but if you're looking, and you don't track calories, but if you were looking to lose weight, that's going to do it.
Oh yeah.
Assuming that calories are in control, that will do it. You will not be hungry. Your body composition will change if you are training. You will lose body fat, and you will, it's weird, you will feel that you are more in control, and that's, giving people back control.
That's so true. I mean, I think Erin would agree with me too, that when we lead clients down this path of protein first, we start getting feedback within a couple of weeks, like, I'm not hungry. Yeah. I'm having a hard time even eating all of that, to which then my point is, okay, well then maybe you don't need that much. If you're literally choking it down, you're not hungry, and you're force feeding yourself, then that's probably a little too high on the spectrum for you.
Totally agree with you.
Right. So, okay, good. So a little bit of confirmation there. So I'm listening, and again, this is an audience of health coaches rather than health consumers. So I do
Which
know.
I love. I'm really excited to be able to talk to healthcare professionals. That is, because you guys are the ones that actually move the needle and really push it forward.
Oh, thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
So I think it's okay to get a little bit geekier here. So one of the things that I have gotten from some of my more plant-based clients that have come into my gym is this concern about overeating protein, eating too much of it. Some of them have heard the term mTOR, and I thought that was bad and caused some sort of problem. So could you please speak to this a little bit? Let's debunk this a little bit.
Yeah. Well, number one, mTOR is in every tissue, whether it's kidney, liver, brain. mTOR is a complex that exists in every tissue. In skeletal muscle, mTOR is exquisitely sensitive to amino acids, dietary protein. Okay. mTOR is also stimulated by resistance exercise in skeletal muscle. So if an individual were to say, well, eating protein is bad for you, it stimulates mTOR. Well, if it's bad for you by eating protein, then you probably shouldn't be exercising either. So we clearly know that doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense.
But I will tell you that is not discussed is that mTOR it's the chronic stimulation of mTOR, and it's the insulin also stimulates mTOR, excess calories, all energy stimulates mTOR. These complexes are much more sensitive in other parts of the body, like the liver and the pancreas, than skeletal muscle. If an individual is worried about mTOR, they should not be eating a high carbohydrate diet. If an individual is worried about mTOR stimulation, it's really the chronic stimulation. They cannot be eating excess calories. It has nothing to do with protein, and the studies have never linked protein and cancer. There's a a relative risk. Relative risk is
Right.
if you smoke and, if you smoke, your risk of getting cancer is 12. A relative risk has to be above 2 to be considered clinically significant. None of the data supports that. So if there is a connection, and, Annals of Internal Medicine came out and did these grade analysis, which is considered the gold standard analysis. They did not find that we should start reducing any of our meat consumption. Protein, as it relates to mTOR, is a relative risk of 1.2 or red meat. So at what point does that become clinically significant? It's not.
Right.
And then the next people are going to say, so number one, mTOR exists in all tissues. mTOR is exquisitely sensitive to skeletal muscle. mTOR and skeletal muscle is exquisitely sensitive to amino acids. You want to stimulate mTOR. That's what you do for muscle protein synthesis.
Right.
That argument makes no sense.
Right.
It doesn't make any sense. There's a narrative. There's an anti-animal narrative, an anti-animal group that isn't doing it for health reasons, but truly is creating a narrative that is not true. And in fact, one of the risk factors for cancer is being obese.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Not only that, we haven't even decided what cancer we're talking about.
Right.
So what cancer are we talking about? Colon cancer? So you're saying red meat causes colon cancer by what mechanism of action?
Exactly.
People are going to say TMAO. Well, TMAO is much higher in those that eat fish.
Yeah.
So how does that work? When someone were to examine the evidence, and then I'll tell you that they'll say, well, the IR committee issued it as a carcinogen. Well, what people don't know is that the IR committee threw out, it was a largely vegetarian group. They threw out all the randomized controlled trials, a large portion of them because they were small in power. They didn't have a ton of people. So they threw out all the high quality evidence and utilized epidemiology and observational data to make these claims. And this guy named David Klurfeld came out and he said, listen, this is what's being done. This is not, it doesn't have integrity. Yeah. So these are just examples of pushing agenda and pushing narrative that ultimately really, really hurts people.
Yeah.
So when I have vegan and vegetarian clients, and listen, I don't have many, the first question I ask them is, well, why? Because I actually I was vegetarian myself. I'm not actually tied to this beef, red meat thing. I just know from, 2 decades of experience, what it can do for the human body. And listen, hey, we all have to meet people where they're at. For a vegan or vegetarian, you're going to add in branched chain amino acids. You're going to add in creatine. You're going to try to augment the food matrix by these things.
Yep.
So there are ways to do it. And I guess that was really long-winded, and I'm sorry.
Oh, but that nugget at the end was helpful because I never occurred to me to add in creatine and BCAAs for plant-based.
So vegan and vegetarians, it's interesting. We talk about dietary protein, but there's multiple levels to which dietary protein impact our health. We think about dietary protein, specifically red meat, when we think about, iron, and we think about the macronutrient protein. But protein in and of itself, just like whey protein, is a food matrix. So it has other things in it. It has creatine. It has these other non-nutritive components that you can't get otherwise. And this is beyond the micronutrients. This is beyond zinc, selenium, and the B vitamins. These are, taurine, you're thinking about taurine, you're thinking about, ways in which you can generate glutathione. You're thinking about all of these other CoQ10 and creatine and just all these other nutrients.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool.
Carnitine. Anyway.
Yeah. It was, I don't work with a lot of vegan or vegetarian clients, but I've had a few actually. And most of them either came to me through my gym or people that have known me for a long time that knew I wasn't going to judge them in any way. They just trusted my opinion. And they came to me saying, I would really like to maintain my plant-based lifestyle. I want to upgrade it. Will you help me? Sure. And so this is where we got into the supplementation. I've told this story before. I had one client, he was a male who loved to train. He was a 230 pound guy, 225 to 230, wanted to kind of lose some weight, was training. And when I had him fill out just a food log so I could get a feel for where he was, he was getting like maybe 60 grams of protein a day.
Right.
So it was, okay, we got to add this. And the amount of supplementation he had to add to his diet to just get close to what he needed. That's where the light bulb finally went off. Like, wait a minute, if I have to supplement this much, is this really the right approach to me?
Totally.
Okay. So he was able to kind of figure that out rather than me saying,
right,
I think you're on the wrong road.
I think that's great. I think if you lead people by questions as opposed to telling them, you know, it's totally the right way. You nailed it.
Yeah. But then there's others that are coming to this lifestyle, more of a plant-based lifestyle, for other reasons.
I agree. You know? And you know what? And I would say probably 2% of the population thrives with a plant-based diet. And this is due to what we're starting to see in some of the initial research, is that their gut microbiome looks more like a ruminant, and they can actually generate amino acids. They're only proof of concept studies, but I think that that's what the research is going to end up showing, is that humans that thrive on a plant-based diet actually change their gut microbiome and begin to extract nutrients that they wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah.
But
have you noticed though, if you know, of that 2%, how many of them were brought up that way versus suddenly tried to, do we know?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I don't have an answer for you. And also I will say, you can't maintain that for a lifetime, especially as you age. It just doesn't support tissue. It may, you know, I've seen some people thrive for a few years on it, but I haven't seen it have a lot of longevity, especially then as you start to look at teeth and bone density, and it just becomes a mess. Hormonal status becomes messy.
Okay. So one thing that you dropped in your kind of leading us into this protein conversation was this idea of muscle quality, the quality of the tissue.
Yeah.
And that's something I've never heard before.
Yeah.
Oh, I've heard lots of quantity, but can you speak to what that is? Tell us about it.
And I think that this is a real problem in our medical community, in terms of how we can really quantify, but also qualify the tissue as individual. And this, I actually did some of this research. This was part of my fellowship. I did muscle biopsies on obese and, you know, the whole thing. Part of what happens as we age, or it's not just as we age, if you are obese, we've all seen a marbled steak, right? Fat infiltrates into the tissue. And once fat infiltrates into the tissue over a lifetime, contractility goes down, mitochondria goes down, its capacity to utilize nutrients go down. And this becomes a real problem. The tissue itself becomes essentially diseased, which is why it is so important. And also the fiber type changes, which is why your dad got really thin. Yep. So that the fiber type, and you see it with hypothyroidism, you see it with a lot of things, the tissue fiber type changes. So it gets that, skinnier fiber type, whatever, from a 2 to 1. And I'm not an expert in fiber type. This is, there's certainly a lot more molecular stuff that goes on into that. But the quality of the tissue itself, once it gets fat infiltration, becomes very difficult to manage.
Wow. I'm just curious, can old folks like my dad turn back the clock on protein, to your knowledge, or on muscle, I should say?
It's possible. And I think we'd have to really think about what that looks like. It's possible to always put on tissue. Is it possible once the tissue becomes fibrous to regenerate it? That's challenging. And that's even challenging with hormone replacement. You are looking at more so they have looked at some kind of anabolics for sarcopenia, which I am hoping that they bring on more, because ultimately you have to understand, once physically an individual declines muscularly, it changes everything, because skeletal muscle is also, it's one of the biggest places for glucose disposal. It helps regulate all kinds of things. And also it's an amino acid reservoir. So your question is, can he do it solely by diet and exercise? I think he could put on muscle. I'm not sure if he could totally reverse it. An aging individual is the time where you definitely want to use peptides, assuming that an individual can. Peptide utilization and hormone replacement, and if they're a candidate for some of the other things, for sure.
Well, and all the more reason to continue to drive home how important it is to get your arms around this stuff early.
Yeah.
Right. That, I am a big believer that, I mean, I'm sure this is not true, but I try to tell people it's never too late to do something positive for yourself.
No, that is true. It's never too late.
Yeah. And even if it's, look, you're not going to regenerate muscle tissue. You can just have a better quality of life generally. If you focus on eating the right things and focus on moving more. You know, my mom, Erin, I'm not sure how old your dad is, but like my mom is, overweight. Actually, she also has sarcopenia, but she's got a lot of adipose tissue. She's very heavy, given her age. But that's like a whole other story. But there's so much about her being younger that could have prevented all of this. First of all, smoked at a very young age. Grew up loving processed food. My mom and dad always joke about, like, they were in college. They met when my dad was in college, and like a big night out was Arby's. She loved to go to Arby's. But when, as she got older, she sort of reverted back to that when she and my dad divorced, much later age, but she didn't have to cook anymore. She didn't have a family to cook for. So that's what she did. She ate out, and it was like all fast food, literally for like a decade. Right. But she never really was active. Exercise activity was never something that was valued in my house. Like we were in sports and things, but my parents were never really active people. But we did eat, quote unquote, balanced meals. We always had protein. We always had a salad. We had snacks, all these other things. But when I look back at what could have helped my parents, my mom and my dad respectively, was a greater focus on protein. Because don't get me wrong, it was not uncommon for us to sit down to a dinner of just pasta and salad. We were Italian.
Right.
Okay. So this was a lot. So this focus on protein, but I'm just a huge advocate of movement, in particular strength training, but I wasn't always. I had the same mindset that if I just run more, I'm going to be healthier, so there's so much that we could interrupt earlier on, and it doesn't have to be in your 20s. I mean, I didn't make these changes till I was 40.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
But, even starting at 40 or even 50 I don't know. I mean, I guess I would love your thoughts from a health coaching perspective, moving people in this direction and driving home on what just, a year or two in making these changes can mean to you decades later.
Yeah. I think you bring up a really good point, is that it is never too late to start. And arguably 40 and 50 is still pretty young.
Yeah.
They can make changes if they implement good nutritional habits and training. If they get that right, that same day, they'll actually start to feel better. So they will begin to feel better even before they see anything change. And that's incredible. You do that for a year. And what I've also found is it fires them up.
Yeah.
They're actually much more likely to perform well in other domains. And that becomes amazing. And then it's a feed forward effect.
I love it.
And certainly the one thing that is challenging that I would say for health coaches to overcome is that identifying, does your patient or does your client have a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset? That is, at that age, that's really pivotal, because a fixed mindset person, which is, they're going to be very scared to start something new. They're going to be scared to go to the gym. It's going to be very uncomfortable. That is the group that you're going to find the biggest resistance with. And then there's the growth mindset, is if you tell them what they need to do and you can really positively motivate this group, they do exponentially better. So I think, because the reason I say that is because earlier, when an individual is younger, they have more flexibility. There's more metabolic flexibility. You remember in high school, we used to probably eat Twinkies and didn't get a pound. So there are these capacities for error that become more limited. The older an individual gets, the flexibility for error becomes diminished. By determining, as a health coach, understanding the framework in what drives the person. And I will share a few other things. There are certain patient archetypes, and I don't know, you guys call them clients, but there are archetypes of individuals. There is, for example, the relationship patient, and that patient is going to be driven by what you think of them, your relationship, not wanting to let you down. and there's a questioner patient, and that patient is, well, I'll do it, but I need to know exactly why am I doing this? Right. The whole thing. And then there's just a whole, there's about 10 different archetypes that I've identified. And by understanding what the archetype is, you can actually leverage that, because here's the thing about humans. Humans are totally predictable. Mm-hmm. And in fact, if you plan for their predictability, then you leverage that for themselves. I'll give you an example. What does this mean? You have a 50-year-old or a 40-year-old woman coming in who was really into working out in terms of aerobics. And you're like, hey girl, your body composition isn't changing because now you have 3 kids and you do this. What you end up doing is you ask her, okay, well, where she's failed in the past, where her sticking points have been in the past, are guaranteed to resurface. Mm-hmm. She cannot be surprised by the fact that she gets to the gym and wants to go do the cardio machine again, or it's late at night and wants to eat her kids' cookies. So you plan in advance for the human predictability, and everyone has their vice or their thing, whether it's not time management, right? There's all kinds of excuses, or there's anxiety, which is really just distraction. So that would be the other thing, is really knowing that individual and being very, analytical about identifying the patient's, overarching cyclical habits.
Yeah, very true. I mean, that was a question that you offered up to us earlier in the conversation, to ask your, in our case, client, how long have you been suffering, and starting to recognize not only patterns, but these kind of identity statements that form, identity beliefs that form. And I think that's, well, from our perspective as health coaches, that happens a lot in the discovery call, which is when you're getting on the phone with somebody and trying to figure out if you're a good fit, if you even have the solution for their problem, because we don't want to work with everybody. We do like to specialize in the people we can help.
Right.
But being able to ask the questions that get people to start sharing their identity beliefs is like job one, as far as I'm concerned.
Totally.
I love it. So is this part of what you do within your, tell us a little bit about your practice, about like the type of clients you see,
part of what I do,
and how you practice. Okay.
Yes. I had a practice in New York City. And since COVID, I had 2 babies in 18 months, really everything closed down in New York City because it's kind of crazy, but I have a concierge medical practice. And what that is it really services, I would say it really services 2 kinds of people. It takes care of, kind of, they call me like the cleaner. So they've been to 14 other doctors. No one can figure it out. They're really interested in whether it's functional medicine or it's the traditional route. I'm on it. I'll get the job done. So that's that one group. So it's, relatively sick, pretty complex cases. And then the other group is, that's one group, and maybe there's 3. And then a lot of people come to me for hormones and body composition and have tried everything to lose weight, just all of it. And then the kind of sphere part, like the top end of the group, is like mavericks, thought leaders, SEALs, really elite military operators, CEOs, people that are like, yo, Dr. G, I just came back from this deployment. I feel terrible. There's that. So I do a lot of work with military special operations and people that are very, high, adrenaline, which would include CEOs and people like that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Now you mentioned earlier in the conversation, this idea of not knowing what someone's percent muscle mass should be, and that we've never measured this. There's no knowledge of this. So is there also a research component to what you're building and doing now?
At this point, not yet, but yes, it is something that is something, and collecting data. I mean, certainly we know what is bad in terms of, as it relates to cachexia and wasting, but we don't know what it looks like for optimization. And that will be part of the practice. That component hasn't quite started yet, because that is certainly a little bit more involved. And with everything shut down, people are not, it's challenging.
Yeah. It's an incredible gap. It's an incredible data gap.
Right?
You just don't have a hot clue what that should be.
And also the other flip side of that is, what is real strength? Right. We measure, there's this concept of what a squat should be, what you can do the walk test, which is that get up and go test, which I used to do in clinic, and then the hand grip strength. Yes, that's validated. But the question is it's probably at some point we need to really update that stuff.
Yeah. So I wonder if there's really no accurate way to measure muscle mass and understand what
you can, but people aren't really going to go for a CT.
No,
they're not going to do like CT, MRI, and then have something configured. So there are, and DEXA is what, like what Erin said, that's what everybody uses. That's what it's used in the literature. But there are limits to skeletal muscle, to measuring it. Yeah. The
reason I ask is because what we don't want is folks being like, well, I have no way of knowing. So, what's the point? Let's not lose the forest for the trees.
No, here. And you can use an in-body. There's better. Yeah. We might not know the quality. We might not know the quality of the tissue. We might not know what that looks like, but yeah.
Yeah. There's lots of different ways that you can get at least a baseline or general ideas to kind of where you stand. And then from the standpoint of, and I'm trying to encapsulate a lot of what we talked about today on, as from a coaching perspective, I think it's very easy to have a conversation with somebody around, 1 gram of protein through pound of ideal body weight. Let's start there. Having a conversation about what that might actually look like. This is a coaching conversation, right? From a meal perspective, if we were going to break this down, how many meals do you want to eat per day, Mr. or Mrs. Client, right? What does that really look like?
Totally.
And, what does 40 grams of protein look like in chicken versus eggs or whatever? Just to kind of give people a point of view, it's a great place to start. And Erin, I think you have a great point. Probably the only thing really worth tracking, at this point, making sure you're sort of getting enough. And then from the standpoint of movement, the importance of strength training. And look, not everybody, most people don't have what I have, which is a gym built into my house. Like most people don't have access to that kind of stuff, but they may have access to go to a gym, unless of course you're locked down due to COVID.
Right.
So then what are your options? And, we're big advocates of just moving your own dang body. Right. Basic body weight strength training. So the whole idea is focusing on, to your point, the inputs that actually promote lean body mass health, right? Which is prioritizing protein, some sort of strength training. I would imagine sleep probably falls in there as well.
And then evolving it as we age. And really something that you'll see is that people become very comfortable, and with comfort comes complacency. And that actually doesn't, if you do that, then we know kind of how you're going to age. By understanding that and just really taking back the mind frame into doing things that are uncomfortable and stretching yourself and learning new skills, it's very important. Yeah. That's really valuable.
Before we started recording, you had alluded to the fact that you're looking for some coaching help. So tell us a little bit about what you're looking for.
I am building out the Institute for Muscle-Centric Medicine. I am looking for help, whether it's health coaches that can do back-end stuff too, and are really into the mission. I never hire for skill. Skill is wonderful if that comes, obviously they have to have baseline skill, but I really hire for character and quality and attributes. I would love, if there is someone out there listening that that knows my work and is in and on it with the mission, and you are aligned and you are ready to give out a little tough love. If you're former military, definitely come on in, but no, seriously. And I'm really looking for the right fit.
I just love that you said that too, because we talk to a lot of people that want to coach, and that's all they want to do. They really don't necessarily want to start a business. A lot of people do that too. They love the idea of being their own boss, but there are a lot of people that fundamentally know about themselves. I'm not feeling entrepreneurship here, but I want to coach and I want to help other people. And I love that you said, you want, the credential matters. You've got to have some baseline training. Yeah. But what you're really looking for is the right fit, passion, attitude,
and knows the mission. It really is all about the mission and really being mission focused and resonating with the people, right? So you have to resonate with me, or there has to, or the message. It's really not about me at all. It's really about the message that I'm trying to share. And and I'm looking for people that are really A players, not necessarily that they only want to health coach, that want to, hey, hey, Gabrielle, we can grow this, we can build this. I could see us doing this on the back end, this course and this question and answer group. Cause it really is, like Mark has done an incredible, look at what he's built.
Mm-hmm.
That's incredible. And it's what the world needs.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel the same way about muscle-centric medicine. It's what the world needs. It's what we're missing.
Yeah. So the Institute for Muscle-Centric Medicine will be taking in, I presume, patients that are struggling with their body composition.
Yeah. Anything. Yeah.
And so
really, So the concept of muscle-centric med, that's a really good question. So what kind of patients do I see? Well, I really see, like I said, I see patients that nobody can figure out, that have been everywhere else. I'm definitely have spent a lot of time training as a physician. We have a cardiologist on staff. We have a PA on staff. We have a sports medicine. He's like quadruple board certified. We have very high qualified physicians on staff. But in terms of the patients that I take, it's really just about anything, whether it's hormones. I do a ton of hormones. I do a ton of gut health, believe it or not. A lot of that just from doing it with the guys that have gone on deployment and coming back. They come back with all kinds of things that no one can figure out. A lot of hormones and weight loss.
Yeah.
Like all of it.
Are you doing, given how everything would shut down in New York, are you doing a lot remotely? Is that
everything? Everything is remote right now. Everything is remote.
How about it, Erin? We're seeing a huge trend in this direction. And there's so much that can be done that way. So,
well, there's something to be said for really seeing a patient in person. Part of what I do require is I do require physical exam and all testing. I do require that from another physician. I don't function as a PCP. You don't want to come to me for antibiotics. You want to come to me for other stuff, but I do require physicals for sure, because, it's risky to not see the patient, to make sure that they're, you don't want to miss something.
Right. Nice. Very cool. Yeah. I just wanted to get clarity on kind of who you help at the Institute, because then any coaches that kind of feel like they specialize, that's in their wheelhouse, and feel like they meet your strong list of, criteria.
Yeah. And listen, the more physically active that, I love athletes, right? If you are fit, we have someone who runs the training department. She is just a beast.
Nice.
It's, if an individual is a fit, they're going to know they're fit for sure.
Yeah. So where can people find you? So, and I want to ask this on too, because we do have a lot of health coaches that live in areas where they're really struggling to find practitioners that they feel comfortable referring people to. So from a patient standpoint, where should people find you? But also from a coach's standpoint, someone that would love to throw their hat in the ring and just be like, man, I am on team muscle-centric medicine. Where do they go?
So you can find me online, Dr. Gabrielle Lyon. The website is going to go through a whole new relaunch. Again, I just had 2 babies not too long ago, and less than 6 months, but they can find me online there. And also on Instagram, I'm very active, on YouTube as well. Do a lot of teaching right from the source on YouTube. And I have a great newsletter, which is all vetted and written by me. Let's see where else. Yeah. Am I missing anything? Twitter, I'm not as active, but those are the main components. And then if anyone wanted to apply to be a patient, they can do that. I have a course coming out and a book in the year.
Amazing. Wow.
Where you find the time, I have no idea. I'm in complete awe. And thank you just so much for, first of all, gracing us with your time. I know how busy you are, clearly. But second of all, I guess just speaking common sense and helping people feel, I don't know about you, Erin, but I feel more empowered coming out of this conversation, that we're moving in the right direction, and that focusing on all of the things that are not productive gets us nowhere. Let's focus on the things that are productive and move us in that direction.
I have a sense of excitement about what the human race could become.
Yeah. I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
It's true.
We are a robust animal, one of the apex predators, and you just see this fading.
Yeah.
And so personally, it helps me justify my life choices. I love the fact that I'm getting stronger, and by the way, heavier as I age. Like, let's buck that trend.
Yeah.
It's really cool. It's just such a refreshing viewpoint that you have. I really do hope it takes off. I'm actually going to share this episode, even though we don't typically speak to health consumers. I'm making my clients listen to this so they understand that your quest for getting lighter and frailer and leaner and smaller and tinier is not going to serve you. Let's change this whole freaking narrative. Anyway, I'm excited.
Awesome.
Boom. I love it. Thank you so much, Doctor.
Of course.
Fantastic.
Thank you guys so much for having me. It was such a pleasure. Really, really fun. So thank you.
Loved it.
This podcast was brought to you by Primal Health Coach Institute. To learn more about how to become a successful health coach, get in touch with us by visiting primalhealthcoach.com/call. Or if you're already a successful health coach, practitioner, influencer, or thought leader with a thriving business and an interesting story, we'd love to hear from you. Connect with us at hello@primalhealthcoach.com and let us know why we need to interview you for Health Coach Radio. Thanks for listening.